Russia had calculated that the Arctic would remain its frozen fortress, an impenetrable domain where Western forces could never challenge Moscow's supremacy. However, on March 15, 2026, three nuclear-powered American submarines surfaced simultaneously through the ice near Severomorsk, the home of Russia's Northern Fleet, in a display of naval dominance that turned Putin's Arctic dreams into a waking nightmare. The frozen waters that Moscow believed would protect its strategic rear have instead become a hunting ground where Russia's most advanced vessels are being tracked, targeted, and rendered completely defenseless. This is not a routine naval exercise. This represents the collapse of decades of Russian Arctic investment, the exposure of critical vulnerabilities in Moscow's nuclear deterrent, and the emergence of a new theater where the balance of power has shifted so dramatically that Russia can no longer guarantee the safety of its own strategic assets in waters it once controlled absolutely. The images you are about to see on your screens will reveal how the United States Navy has achieved something unprecedented in modern military history. What you see is not just submarines breaking through Arctic ice. The footage shows the systematic dismantling of Russia's Arctic defense architecture, the exposure of underwater tracking networks Moscow spent billions to construct, and the positioning of Western naval forces in locations that make Russia's Northern Fleet vulnerable to elimination within minutes of any conflict. But that is not the most shocking detail. There are three critical factors that have transformed the Arctic from Russia's sanctuary into Putin's trap. The first is the deployment of advanced underwater drone networks that map every Russian submarine movement in real time. The second is the integration of NATO's northern expansion with Iceland, Norway, and now Finland, creating an unbreakable surveillance chain across Arctic approaches. The third factor is so sensitive that Western intelligence agencies have kept it classified until now. We will explain this in the later parts of the video. Now we must look at what happened on that frozen morning when American submarines announced to Moscow that the Arctic no longer belongs to Russia alone. On March 15, 2026, at approximately 600 hours local time, the USS Connecticut, USS Seawolf, and USS Jimmy Carter executed a coordinated surface maneuver 70 kilometers from Severomorsk Naval Base in the Barents Sea. According to reports from the Institute for the Study of War, this marked the first time since the Cold War that multiple American attack submarines surfaced simultaneously in Russian-claimed Arctic waters. The location was not chosen randomly. Severomorsk serves as home port for Russia's Northern Fleet, including 6 Delta IV class ballistic missile submarines carrying 16 R-29 RMU Sinova missiles each, and the newer Bore-class submarines armed with Bulava intercontinental ballistic missiles. The American submarines surfaced in waters Russia considers its exclusive economic zone, within visual range of coastal radar installations, and remained on the surface for 47 minutes before submerging again and disappearing into the deep Arctic waters. Russian coastal defense units detected the surfacing but could do nothing to challenge it. Patriot air defense batteries positioned around Severomorsk are designed to intercept aircraft and missiles, not submarines operating on the surface. Russian naval vessels remained in port, unable to respond quickly enough to intercept submarines that could dive and vanish before any surface ship could reach them. The Russian Air Force dispatched 2 142 maritime patrol aircraft, but by the time they arrived on station, the American submarines had already submerged. Moscow's response demonstrated the fundamental problem it now faces in Arctic waters. Russian forces can detect American submarines when they choose to reveal themselves, but they cannot prevent them from operating freely, cannot track them reliably when they dive deep, and cannot threaten them with any conventional weapons system currently deployed in the Arctic theater. The technical capabilities that enabled this operation represent a quantum leap in underwater warfare that Russia simply cannot match. The Virginia-class and Seawolf-class submarines operated by the United States Navy employ pump-jet propulsion systems that produce significantly less acoustic signature than traditional propellers used on Russian submarines. These vessels can operate at depths exceeding 400 meters while maintaining speeds above 30 knots, making them nearly impossible to track with conventional sonar arrays. The submarines utilize advanced sound-dampening hull coatings and internal noise reduction systems that allow them to operate in what submariners call the convergence zone, a depth where ocean temperature and pressure conditions bend sound waves away from surface detection systems. According to leaked NATO assessments, American attack submarines operating in Arctic waters are effectively invisible to Russian tracking networks unless they deliberately choose to reveal their position. But the submarines themselves represent only the visible element of a much larger transformation in Arctic military balance. The United States Navy has deployed networks of underwater autonomous vehicles that map ocean floor topography, monitor water temperature and salinity conditions, and track acoustic signatures of all vessels operating in Arctic waters. These unmanned systems, designated as Orca extra-large unmanned underwater vehicles, can operate for months without surfacing, repositioning themselves autonomously to maintain optimal surveillance coverage. Defense Intelligence Agency reports indicate that at least 12 of these systems now operate in the Barents Sea, Kara Sea, and approaches to Russian Arctic naval bases. The vehicles communicate via extremely low-frequency transmissions that Russian electronic warfare systems cannot intercept or jam. Each vehicle carries passive sonar arrays more sensitive than anything mounted on Russian surface vessels, creating an underwater surveillance network that tracks every Russian submarine from the moment it leaves port. The integration of satellite surveillance with underwater sensor networks has eliminated the opacity that once protected submarine operations. The United States National Reconnaissance Office operates synthetic aperture radar satellites that can detect underwater objects to depths of 50 meters by measuring minute surface water disturbances caused by submarine passage. These satellites pass over Arctic waters every 90 minutes, creating a continuous surveillance picture that feeds into automated tracking systems. When combined with data from underwater sensor networks, the system can predict Russian submarine positions with accuracy sufficient for targeting. American attack submarines receive real-time updates on Russian vessel locations through secure underwater communication systems, allowing them to trail Russian ballistic missile submarines without ever being detected themselves. Moscow has invested heavily in Arctic submarine capabilities, but every vessel they deploy operates under constant American surveillance from the moment it leaves protected waters. This technological dominance translates into strategic consequences that fundamentally alter nuclear deterrence calculations. Russia's nuclear triad depends critically on its submarine-launched ballistic missile capability. The Northern Fleet's ballistic missile submarines provide the most survivable element of Russia's nuclear forces, theoretically capable of launching devastating retaliatory strikes even after a first strike eliminates land-based missiles and bomber bases. However, this deterrent value evaporates if the submarines themselves can be tracked and targeted. American attack submarines now trail Russian ballistic missile submarines during their patrol routes, maintaining firing solutions that would allow them to sink Russian strategic vessels within minutes of receiving authorization. According to analysis by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the United States Navy has achieved the capability to eliminate Russia's entire Northern Fleet ballistic missile submarine force before any of those vessels could launch their weapons. This represents the collapse of assured second strike capability that underpins nuclear deterrence theory. The March 15 surface maneuver was designed specifically to communicate this strategic shift to Moscow. By surfacing near Severomorsk, American submarines demonstrated that they can operate with impunity in waters Russia claims to control. The 47-minute surface duration was calculated to allow Russian surveillance systems ample time to observe and photograph the vessels, ensuring that Moscow received the message. Intelligence analysts interpret this as a deliberate signal that the United States Navy can hunt Russian submarines in their home waters whenever necessary. The psychological impact on Russian naval commanders cannot be overstated. Every submarine that leaves Severomorsk now operates with the knowledge that American attack submarines may be tracking it, waiting for authorization to fire. The stress of operating under constant potential threat degrades crew performance, accelerates wear on vessels pushed harder to evade tracking, and undermines the confidence necessary for effective military operations. The geographic transformation of the Arctic amplifies Russia's strategic nightmare. Finland's accession to NATO in 2023 fundamentally altered the Baltic Sea strategic environment, but its implications for Arctic security have only recently become apparent. Finnish territory extends into the Arctic Circle, and the Finnish defense forces now integrate fully with NATO's Northern Command structure. Sweden's NATO membership adds another piece to the puzzle, creating an unbroken chain of NATO territory from Norway through Sweden and Finland to the Baltic states. This geographic encirclement means that Russian vessels transiting from Baltic sea bases to Arctic operating areas must pass through waters monitored by multiple NATO member states. The Guyuk Gap, The narrow passage between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom that all Russian submarines must traverse to reach the Atlantic has become a kill zone where NATO anti-submarine warfare forces maintain constant vigilance. Every Russian submarine attempting to break out into open ocean must run a gauntlet of NATO surveillance and attack capabilities that has become nearly impossible to penetrate undetected. Iceland's strategic importance has grown exponentially in this new Arctic competition. The island sits astride the Geopolitical Gap, and its Keflavik Air Base now hosts P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft that hunt submarines across the North Atlantic and Arctic approaches. These aircraft employ advanced magnetic anomaly detectors and deploy sonobuoy networks that create acoustic barriers Russian submarines cannot cross without detection. Norway has expanded its submarine fleet and integrated it with NATO's underwater surveillance networks, creating redundant tracking capabilities that ensure no Russian vessel can operate freely in Arctic waters. The Norwegian intelligence service reports that Russian submarine activity has declined by 47% since 2024, not because Moscow has reduced its Arctic priorities, but because Russian commanders recognize the futility of deploying vessels into an environment where they face immediate detection and tracking. The economic dimension of Russia's Arctic predicament compounds the military vulnerability. Moscow has invested an estimated $120 billion in Arctic military infrastructure over the past 15 years, constructing new naval bases, upgrading airfields, and deploying advanced radar systems across the Russian Arctic coast. The Northern Fleet has received priority funding, with new Borei-class ballistic missile submarines and Yasen-class attack submarines representing the most advanced vessels Russia can produce. However, these investments have created capabilities that cannot be effectively employed. The submarines are technically sophisticated, but they operate in an environment where American technological superiority renders them vulnerable. Russia has built a fleet designed to contest American naval dominance, but that fleet now serves primarily as targets for American submarines that can hunt them with impunity. The strategic return on Russia's Arctic investment has collapsed, leaving Moscow with expensive infrastructure and vulnerable assets that provide little actual military capability. The human dimension of this strategic shift manifests in the deteriorating morale within Russia's submarine force. Submariners traditionally represent the elite of any navy, volunteers who accept the dangers of underwater service in exchange for prestige and the knowledge that they operate the most survivable element of national defense. However, Russian submarine crews now face a reality where their vessels offer little actual survivability against American tracking and attack capabilities. Sailors forced to serve on submarines they know are being tracked live under constant psychological pressure that degrades unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. Crew rotation cycles have accelerated as submariners reach psychological breaking points and refuse to deploy on additional patrols. The Russian Navy faces recruiting challenges as potential submariners recognize that service on ballistic missile submarines no longer represents the prestigious posting it once did, but rather a dangerous assignment on vessels that cannot fulfill their strategic mission. Putin's public rhetoric on Arctic sovereignty contrasts starkly with the reality his naval commanders face. Moscow claims the Arctic as a Russian sphere of influence, declares vast territorial waters as exclusive economic zones, and threatens consequences for any challenge to its Arctic claims. However, American submarines operate freely in waters Russia claims to control, and Moscow possesses no effective means to challenge that presence. The gap between Russian claims and Russian capabilities has never been wider. Putin can deploy additional submarines, but each deployment simply provides more targets for American tracking. Russia can threaten NATO members with consequences, but those threats ring hollow when Moscow cannot even guarantee the safety of its own submarines in home waters. The Arctic has become a theater where Russian weakness stands fully exposed, visible to Moscow's own military leadership, to Western intelligence services, and increasingly to the Russian public as information about American submarine operations filters through military families and social networks. The classified third factor mentioned earlier can now be revealed. According to German intelligence reports obtained by Radio Free Europe, the United States Navy has deployed a new class of underwater weapons that operate autonomously without direct human control. These systems, identified in intelligence documents as Mark 48 AD Cap Mod 8 torpedoes with autonomous hunting capabilities, can track and engage targets using artificial intelligence systems that process acoustic data and make firing decisions faster than any human operator. The weapons can be pre-positioned in strategic locations, activated remotely, and will autonomously hunt designated target types until successful engagement or fuel exhaustion. Intelligence analysts assess that these autonomous weapons have been positioned near Russian submarine transit routes, creating a permanent threat that Russian vessels cannot detect until weapons activate and begin their attack runs. The deployment represents a fundamental shift in naval warfare, where human decision-making has been removed from the engagement sequence, allowing weapons to attack with speed and precision that human-controlled systems cannot match. Russia possesses no equivalent capability and no effective defense against autonomous underwater weapons that can wait silently for months before activating. Looking forward, the Arctic strategic environment will only deteriorate further for Russia. The United States Navy plans to expand its attack submarine fleet from 55 vessels to 72 by 2035, with new Virginia Block V submarines optimized specifically for Arctic operations. These vessels will incorporate under-ice navigation systems, reinforced sail structures for ice penetration, and extended endurance that allows them to remain on station in Arctic waters for 6 months without resupply. NATO members are investing in complementary capabilities, with Norway building additional submarines, the United Kingdom expanding its Astute-class program, and France deploying its Barracuda-class vessels to northern waters. The alliance is creating a multinational submarine force that will outnumber Russian Arctic submarines by 5-1, ensuring overwhelming superiority in any underwater engagement. Russia's shipbuilding capacity cannot match this expansion, and economic sanctions limit Moscow's access to advanced propulsion systems and electronics necessary for competitive submarine construction. The implications extend beyond the Arctic theater. If Russia cannot guarantee the survivability of its ballistic missile submarines, the credibility of its entire nuclear deterrent comes into question. American strategic planners have long focused on counterforce capabilities that could eliminate Russian nuclear forces in a first strike. But the survivability of Russian submarines provided assured retaliation that made such strikes unthinkable. That calculation changes if American attack submarines can sink Russian ballistic missile submarines before they can launch their weapons. Moscow faces a strategic dilemma with no good solutions. It can withdraw submarines from vulnerable Arctic operating areas, but alternative deployment zones offer even less protection. It can attempt to develop new submarine technology that evades American tracking, but that requires time and resources Russia does not have. It can threaten escalation to compensate for conventional weakness, but such threats lose credibility when the underlying military balance has shifted so decisively. China watches Russia's Arctic predicament with growing concern about parallel vulnerabilities in the South China Sea and Western Pacific. Beijing has invested heavily in submarine capabilities designed to deny American naval access to waters near Chinese territory. However, the same technological advantages that allow American submarines to dominate Arctic waters apply equally to Pacific operations. If the United States Navy can track and target Russian submarines in the Arctic, it can certainly track and target Chinese submarines in the Pacific. The demonstration of American capabilities near Severomorsk serves as an unmistakable signal to Beijing that its own submarines would face similar vulnerabilities in any conflict. China's much-discussed anti-access area denial strategy depends on submarine forces disrupting American naval operations, but that strategy collapses if Chinese submarines can be tracked and eliminated before they engage. Moscow's Arctic humiliation provides Beijing with a preview of the operational environment Chinese submariners would face against American anti-submarine warfare capabilities. The psychological warfare dimension cannot be overlooked. Every Russian submarine deployment now occurs with the knowledge that American forces are watching, tracking, and maintaining firing solutions. This awareness itself degrades Russian operational effectiveness, as commanders make overly cautious decisions designed to minimize detection rather than optimize mission accomplishment. American submarines can manipulate Russian behavior simply by revealing their presence occasionally, creating paranoia about whether subsequent operations are also being tracked. The March 15 surfacing was designed specifically to create this psychological effect, demonstrating American capabilities while leaving Russian commanders uncertain about the full extent of NATO's tracking networks. The uncertainty itself becomes a weapon, forcing Russia to assume worst-case scenarios and adjust operations accordingly, which further degrades efficiency and effectiveness. What are your thoughts on this Arctic transformation? Do you believe Russia can develop countermeasures to American submarine superiority, or has the balance shifted irreversibly? The Arctic waters that Moscow once controlled now serve as hunting grounds where Russia's most powerful weapons have become vulnerable targets. Putin set out to establish Arctic dominance that would secure Russia's northern approaches and protect its strategic deterrent. Today, he confronts a reality where American submarines operate freely in waters he claims to control, tracking his ballistic missile submarines and demonstrating that Russia's nuclear deterrent exists only at American sufferance. The frozen sea has not protected Russia. It has trapped the Russian Navy in a strategic dead end from which there appears no escape. The images of American submarines surfacing near Severomorsk will haunt Russian naval planners for years to come, a permanent reminder that the Arctic belongs to whoever possesses superior technology and the will to deploy it. Russia is learning what it means to face an opponent that can see in the dark depths where Moscow believed its submarines could hide. The Arctic is no longer Russia's frozen fortress. It has become Putin's frozen prison. Don't forget to share your thoughts on this topic in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like our video. The transformation of Arctic military balance represents one of the most significant strategic shifts of the decade, and we will continue examining every development as this new Cold War theater evolves. Presented by TGN. Thank you for choosing us.